Hello, today I'll be reading a novel by Oliver Bowden. It's called Assassin's Creed Renaissance. Alright, so I'll go down, let's get to chapter 1. Okay, 1. Torches gleamed on, Torches gleamed and flickered high on the towers of the Palacio Vecchino and the Bar Gallo, and just a few lanterns shimmered in the cathedral square. A little way of the north sun also illuminated the quarries along the banks of the river Arno, where late as it is was for the city where most people retired indoors with the coming of the night. A few sailors and stevedores could be through the gloom. Some of the sailors, still attending to their ships and boats, hastened to make their final repairs to rig and to core the rope nearly on the dark, scrubbed decks. While the stevedores hurried to haul or carry their cargo to the safety of the nearby warehouses. Lights also gleamed in the warehouses and the brothels, but very few people walked the streets. It had been 7 years since the 20-year-old Lorenzo di Medici has been elected to be the leadership of the city, bringing with him at least a sense of order and calm to the intense rivalry between the leading international banking and merchant families who made Florence one of the wealthiest cities in the world. Despite this city never being ceased to simmer and the occasional boil over as each faction strove for control. Some of them shifting alliances, some remaining permanent and implacable enemies. Florence, in the year of our Lord, 1476, even on a jasmine-sweet evening in the spring, when you could almost forget the stench of the Arno if the wind was in the right direction, wasn't the safest place to be in the open after the sun has gone down. The moon has now risen in a now cobalt sky, lording it over in the host of the attentive stars. Its light fell over on the open square where the Ponte Vecchino had its crowded shops, dark and silent now. Now joins the north bank of the river. Its light also found out a figure clad in black, standing on the roof of the church of Santo Stefano al Porti, a young man only 17 years old, but tall and proud, surveying the neighborhood below. Kneeling, he put his hand on his lips and whistled a low but piercing sound. In response, he watched first one, then three, then a dozen men, at last 20 men, young like himself, most clad in black, some with blood red, green or azure coils or hats, all with swords and daggers on their belts, emerged from the dark streets and the archways into the square. Again, the gang of dangerous-looking youths fanned out, a cocky assurance in their movement. The young man looked down at the eager faces, pale with the moonlight, gazing up at him. He raised his fist above his head and did a definite salute. "We stand together," he cried. As they too raised their fists. some drawing their weapons and brandishing them, and cheered, "Together!" The young man quickly climbs, cat-like, down the unfinished facade of the roof to the church porticino, and from it leapt, cloak flying, landed in a crouch, safely in the midst, gathering round the expectantly. "Silence, my friends!" He held up his hand to arrest a last lone shout. He smiled grimly. "Do you know why I called you here, my closest allies, here tonight? To ask your aid. For too long I have been in the silence, while our enemy, you know who I mean, Verily da Pezzi, he has gone about this town, slandering my family, dragging our name in the mud, and trying in his pathetic way to demand us. Normally I would not stoop to kicking such a mangy cur, but he was interrupted as a large, jagged rock hurled from the direction of the bridge landed at his feet. "Enough of your nonsense, Skrilla!" A voice called. The young man turned as one of his group in the direction of the voice. Already he knew whom it belonged to. Crossing the bridge from the south side was another gang of young men approaching. Its leader swaggered at its head, a red cloak held by a casp bearing of a device of a golden dolphins and crosses on the blue ground. Over his dark velvet suit, his hand was on the pommel of his sword. He was passably handsome. His looks married by his cruel mouth and weak chin, and though he was a little fat, there was no doubting the power in his arms and legs. Buonasera, Verity, the young man cried. "We are just talking about you." And he had bowed in great courtesy, while assuming a look of surprise. "But you must forgive me. We were not expecting you, personally. I thought that Pezzi always hired others to do their dirty work." Verity coming closer, drew himself as he and his troop came to a halt a few yards away. "Ezio Auditore, you pampered little whelp. I'd say it was rather your family of pen pushers and accountants that goes running to guards whenever the faintest sign of trouble. Carbo." He gripped the hilt of his sword. "Afraid to handle things yourself, I say." Well, what can I say, Verio City Caruni? Last time I saw her, your sister, Viola, seemed quite satisfied with the handling I gave her. Ezio Auditore gave his enemy a broad grin, contending to hear his companion's snigger and grin behind him. But he knew he'd gone too far. Betty had already turned purple with rage. "That's quite enough from you, Ezio, you little prick. Let's see if you fight as well as you gabble." He turned his head back to his men, raising his sword. "Kill the bastards," he bellowed. At once another rock whirled through the air, but this time it wasn't thrown as a challenge. It caught Ezio a glancing blow on his forehead, breaking the skin and drawing blood. Ezio staggered back momentarily as he hailed from the rocks. float from the hand of Verity's followers. His own men barely had time to rally before the Pazzi gang was upon them, rushing over the bridge to Ezio and his men. All at once, the fighting was so close and so fast there was hardly time at first to draw swords or even daggers. So the two gangs just went at each other using their fists. The battle was hard and grim. Brutal kicks and punches connected with the sickening sound of crunching bone. For a while, it could have gone either way. Then his vision slightly impaired by the flow of blood from his forehead, saw two of his best men stumble and go down, to be trampled on by Pazzi's thugs. Freddy laughed and, close to Ezio, swung another blow at his head, his hand grasping the heavy stone. Ezio dropped to his haunches and the blow went wide. But it had been too close for comfort. Now the Auditore faction was getting the worst of it. Ezio did not manage before he could rise to his feet to wrestle his dagger free and slice wildly but successfully at the thigh of the heavy-built Pazzi thug, who was bearing down at him with his sword and dagger unsheathed. Ezio's dagger tore through fabric and into the muscle and sinew, and the man let loose an agonizing howl and went over, dropping his weapon and clutching his wound with both hands. As the blood belched forward. Scrambling desperately to get to his feet, Ezio looked around. He could see that the Pazzi have all but surrounded his own men, penning them against one wall of the church. Feeling some of the strength returning to his legs, he made his way towards his fellows, ducking under the scything blades of another Pazzi henchman. He managed to connect his fist to the man's stubby jaw, and had the satisfaction of seeing teeth fly, and his would-be assailant fall to his knees, stunned by the blow.